Aloha, welcome to Making Democracy Work. This program is sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Hawaii's Educational Fund. My usual co-host, Pearl Chang Johnson, will be back. She wasn't able to be with us today, but never fear. And today we have in the audience a representative from the State House. She's a freshly minted politician, Amy Perruso from Wahiawa, District 46, and one of our 11 fresh persons this year at the Legislature. And thank you so much for Amy. You are everywhere and all things good, it seems to me. I'm glad that I got to have you all to myself, it turns out, with the rest of Hawaii, for a little bit. So welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
So Amy,
yes.
What's it like mid-career to go from being a teacher for more than a decade in one place and embracing an entirely different career that is a much broader platform with a lot of different challenges? What's it been like?
I think that, so honestly, I never intended to enter into electoral politics. I never saw myself as a politician. That wasn't part of my life's plan. And I really do still see myself as a teacher, legislator. You know, I see myself as an educator, and I don't think that will ever go away, because I did spend almost 20 years in the Department of Education, and I was really committed to that work. But this new work is very challenging, and I feel like I'm learning how to be a better organizer of my community, how to really help facilitate conversations, and I'm learning new strategies and skills about how to really see and hear people and make sure that people in my community are heard. So it's been a really profound experience, actually. It's been life-changing.
Well, I wanted to emphasize the educational aspects of it, but since you talked about your community and your work in the community, you are incredibly active. You go to meetings, I don't know how many nights a week, but it seems like really a lot.
Yeah.
And now you're changing the way that you're able to interact with them since you are at the Legislature. And how is that process of translating what you hear? How does that work?
Right, so it's complicated. I think what has been happening, even since before I began running for office, is that I've been paying attention to community concerns and trying to see how I can be helpful, right? And how I can use whatever platform I have to help make positive change. And I think that I have just kind of principles of engaging that are facilitating or like supporting my development in that area. I think like I'm trying to make sure that people who are not traditionally heard, either at the Legislature or in my community, know that they have power and help them figure out how to exercise that power.
How do you do that as a practical matter? I mean,
yeah, it's not easy because there are reasons that people feel alienated and frustrated and disenfranchised, and it's historical. Like it's processes that have been happening over time. So it's hard to challenge that. But I think what has been working is starting small and figuring out what we can tackle, what our resources are, and how we can really connect to networks that we are all engaged in, but they're kind of invisible to us.
Like?
So I would say, I'm thinking of one project in particular. There are a group of parents in my community in Wahiawa who were really frustrated with the direction of public education because they felt like there's so much over-testing and so much marginalization.
Over-testing. Okay, I don't want that to get lost. Okay.
Right, and really a a marginalization of what they think is important, which is, the whole child, arts, Hawaiian culture, and really like close attention to the kinds of young people that we are growing in our school system. And they were angry about it. And I think that we started talking about the sources of their anger and just figuring out like what they wanted, and then how we could take steps to realize the kinds of things they wanted to happen for their kids.
This is completely unfair after
Why?
your very first session.
Why?
But have you had any inkling that there's any movement in the direction that you want to go? And I realize that we say things like, positive change. And
Yeah,
it's like
yeah.
one person's positive change is,
right.
is another person's
Yeah.
backlash. So maybe we
Yeah.
should define what for you
Yeah.
that really looks like.
Yeah, so I think, I'm clearly a progressive. I don't think that's a secret. And my 3 priorities have been and will continue to be social equality, so support for working families, public education, and addressing climate change. And I think that as frustrating as, it sometimes felt during this last session, I do think that there have been positive movement forward, that there has been. And so both in my community and in the legislature, I feel like we've had conversations in the legislature that were really tough, but I think that as the communities around the islands start to get more engaged with their legislators and articulate their sources of frustration and recognize their own power, right? Then I think we are going to see those shifts, because the people who are elected, what they care about, they care about many things. But ultimately, they also care about getting elected, right? So I have faith that people will listen to their constituents and address their concerns.
So going from that being on one side of the table where you were looking to influence legislation,
Yeah.
to being at the table where
Yeah.
you're now dealing with what it takes to create legislation. Were there any interesting aha moments?
I would say so many. So I went in with a really ambitious agenda, and my mentors tell me, like, congratulations, you failed. Great job. You failed so well. But I think that in the failing and in the kind of push for the kinds of changes I think we need, I had a lot of great conversations with people, and I think that it's just a matter of changing norms, right? I honestly think that part of the problem in passing legislation that benefits the whole is that too often legislators are caught up either in, protecting their own power base or, doing what is good for their own pursuit of their ambition. And we oftentimes lose sight of the common good, like what's good for ordinary working families. And I think that we have to keep coming back to the table with that conversation, because that's what our communities are telling us. Our communities I have seen such a high level of frustration and alienation just talking to parents across the state, not just about the DOE, but about their community concerns and how they feel they're not being heard, right? And as an HSTA leader, I've traveled all over, and I've talked to a lot of different kinds of people, and much of the commonality is about frustration and feeling like there's a disconnect between what the legislators are doing and what the community wants to have happen.
Definitely a disconnect, because that's why we keep having elections.
Yeah.
But how has the conversation been looking back at your first, and you're barely dry, you've just gotten out of the pool.
Yeah.
How has it been to engage at that level in that square building behind us?
Yeah.
How have you found your way there? You said failures, but I'm not really sure what you meant by that.
I think that, so by failures, I just mean that the things that I was trying to do, I didn't succeed, right? So on my legislative agenda, nothing was passed. But I think that, for me, like in terms of my experience, I come from this deep background as an educator, right? So 20 years in a female-dominated profession, and it was eye-opening for me to move into that kind of work, and it's not a female-dominated place. So the norms are very different, the culture is very different, and
Can you put a flavor on that, or a little story?
So I think so just talking about like what I valued, or why I was just so committed to teaching. The power of teaching had so much to do with the collaboration, the problem solving, the mutual trust, the mutual respect that my colleagues and I had for each other, right, as teachers. So we're peers. And power was something that you shared, and the more you shared, the more everybody benefited. And that's not how I would say the legislature works. I would say that power is tightly controlled, and there's not a lot of collaboration. I mean, it's around the margins, sure, but I think that real collaboration takes deep listening, and I feel like we are struggling really with that question of how are we listening to our constituents, and how are we listening to each other. And I really think the legislature has to grapple with that question, because I don't think we can really move forward until we do something differently around that.
That seems pivotal.
Yeah.
Are there things in the structure of the flow of work that allow for collaboration? I mean, is there something in where in the process might you find some fertile soil for collaboration, given our current structure, or does that structure need to be changed? The way we have committees, the way we have.
I think a lot depends on the style of particular leaders, but I think the most effective leaders are those who, in my view, who share power with their committee members and, are listening to their concerns and kind of taking them into account. And I think that that at the committee level, I think you can see real collaboration. But I also think like within leadership, it's just a really hard structure. It's very hierarchical, and it's very narrow.
Did you find you had the access that you felt you needed?
I felt like I was welcomed as a person, and I felt grateful that my ideas were entertained, but I really was really craving more conversation. So I was disappointed by the lack of political debate, like not just on the floor or in the committees, but in general. I felt like so little is discussed that should and could be discussed, which was surprising for me, because I see it as a center of politics.
We think that's what you do.
Right. Well, and I think it's also part of the culture of the House that, there is a question of discipline, right? So it's important to maintain the discipline of the membership. And I think I really struggle with that. Like, I still struggle with that. I'm not sure how I'm going to negotiate that, because I feel that if I'm not sharing my views or my positions on things, even if they go against the grain, then I'm doing a disservice to public discussion, because I feel like I'm letting that scope be narrowed. But I can understand why some people see it as, disruptive or, unnecessarily antagonistic, or, because it is about the culture of the House. So,
is it different from the Senate in a? Or are you familiar enough with it?
I did spend, and I have spent, so as a civics educator, I spent a lot of time in the building, and you don't really feel the culture until you're part of it. But in the Senate, I would say, like just this last session, I saw much more robust debates, although we did have debates in the House. That's not to say we were like quiescent, we weren't. But the debates I saw in the Senate were, they're meaningful. And I liked that. And that was seen as like, a sign of disorderliness and, but.
So specifically looking at education, I think I was one of so many people. I didn't get to elect you because I don't live in your district, but certainly happy you won.
Thank you.
To have an educator in the legislature just seems like a crying need, and it's one of those things like we don't get to look at the whole mix.
Yeah.
Of our legislative bodies. So there's sometimes holes that go unfilled.
Yeah.
So I can imagine. Did you feel like there was, and people were reaching out to you as like, oh, finally we have another educator on board?
Yeah, and I think that was one of the elements actually of this year that really was kind of a wraparound comfort blanket, because I felt that I not only was being supported by educators and by parents who care about public schools, but that I could be of use, because I understand the system enough that I feel like I can ask questions or engage in conversations that will help all of us, right? So that was one of the highlights. And I think that I'm just like part of a larger narrative. Like there are teachers running for office all over the country, and it's a movement. So, and the reasons are the same,
And the reasons that you see particularly being, I won't say them all.
Oh, yeah. So I think that teachers are frustrated with, we have a teacher shortage crisis. There are other districts where teachers are also severely underpaid. We are paid the lowest in the country if you take cost of living into account. And teachers are worried about funding for schools, wraparound services for students, cutting the arts because of testing. There are a lot of issues happening around funding of public schools that educators are just frustrated about. They feel like they're not being heard, and even if they are being heard, legislators are deliberately starving the public schools in their districts. So it's
a big topic right
now. They're kind of rising up,
As we had on our, Pearl and I had in our last show,
yes.
Educational Institute gave their speech about what they would like to see. But I don't want to go into that because we already spent a whole segment on that. But I do understand that conversation can be so divorced, I'm going to say, from the actual experience of what's happening in the classrooms and what's happening with students versus how are we going to calculate the what it costs per school or stuff like that.
Yeah, I think that, so DBET has done a study that shows that we provide the lowest state and county resources, tax revenues, of any state in the country. And I think that audits, we have a rolling cycle of audits that the DOE goes through, and they haven't found any financial or fiscal mismanagement. So I think that what we've seen in other states, I'm not saying that's necessarily the case here, but this issue of mismanaging money or financial misdeeds is kind of used as a red herring to distract or delay attention to the actual issue of funding. We're starving our schools. So I think that there's a lot of public conversation around there must be some missing money somewhere because it seems like a large number to folks. And it's because we as a state educate the whole state. We're a one state system. We're like the only statewide district. So it's hard for people to understand, and we're the only state that doesn't use property taxes to fund our schools. So we haven't yet figured out a way to adequately fund. And I think that
what do you think about that? Both of those two things. I'm
about the property taxes, or
the having the single
statewide district,
statewide district, and property taxes.
Okay, so I'll deal with the first one. I love it because other states really struggle with the question of equity. So where real estate prices are high, home values are high, then property taxes are high, and the schools are great. So we don't have that kind of district. We have the whole state, so we are all equally poor.
So they say, except that if you spend a lot of time going to different campuses,
yes.
It's really hard to buy that, actually.
Well, I think that what you see is newer communities have newer schools. And we have almost $1 billion in backlog in R&M, repair and maintenance. So we're not taking care of our schools and our communities, but we're building new schools, right? So I think that there is a lack of equity there. We're not spending enough on our schools that are like well-grounded in our communities and are in established communities. We're doing them a huge disservice by not doing R&M and just focusing on like our CIP projects for our new school in our new district, right? So I think that's a huge problem. But then to your second question about the property taxes. So the CONAM, we tried to address that and have an additional surcharge on non-owner occupied properties. And now the mayor is going to use that, I think, for the real. But I think that was actually, for me, it killed two birds with one stone. It addressed this issue of speculation that makes it so hard for local families to live here. And it also would provide more funding for our schools. So for me, that was a win-win.
And it didn't have to be only the taxes collected in Wailea, went to the Wailea schools. It was going to be.
It was would go to a statewide pot.
In statewide pot. Okay, all right. So we have some pictures, and I want to show proof that you actually did get some things.
Well, I worked on things.
You worked on things.
Yeah.
Yes, and there are some big ones that have come up, especially as the League of Women Voters is concerned.
Yeah.
We were very, very, very happy to see that the vote by mail bill did go through this session, and how that must have been a good one for you. I don't know if it's long been on.
It actually is good, but it also is creating like a lot of community conversations because there's a lot of anxiety about it. People, because of the recent city and county elections and some of the issues they experienced, and there's a lot of apprehension. And I think, again, it goes back to this question of trust. So I would have to say there are plenty of people in my community who don't trust those who hold power to do the right thing in the right way at the right time. So there is some anxiety about it, but I think it's the best step forward that we could have made.
And then there was the Women's Legislative Caucus.
Yes.
And was that the one that Macy Arona turned out for?
Yes, because she was one of the founders. I think, I want to say 30 years ago, maybe 40. But the Women's Legislative Caucus was such a source of solace for me because it was a really collaborative group, and I feel like we all have common purpose, and there's a lot of trust, there's a lot of listening, and it's a really powerful space. So
It's not just the House representatives, right?
No.
It's Senate and the,
yes, so it's the House and Senate together, and then also community advocates on women's issues. So it can be a really wide-ranging discussion, and there's not always agreement, but I feel like we keep coming back to the table, and we work past our issues, right? So we agree that we're working for the same purpose.
So they get together and work out an
Yeah,
agenda.
a legislative, like a legislative agenda, right? So we have a set of bills, 10 bills, that we'll submit as a caucus at the beginning of session.
And did you participate in that
Oh, yes, yes.
selection? And
Oh, absolutely. And I think, like, I submitted some, because we vote on them. So the caucus decides through a vote, like, what's going to go forward as part of the package.
I have to ask,
Oh.
does it have to get a certain percentage of the votes?
Yeah, I can't
Or-
remember what it is. I think I want to say it's 60-some%, but I'm not sure. It might just be, I can't remember.
It's not just a minority,
No,
majority.
No,
It's a
yeah,
something.
it has to
Okay.
be. And so I actually had a bill that got pretty far, and I'm still going to work on it next session, about employment and discrimination and harassment. So yeah, so I'm looking forward to working on judiciary.
What was the meat of that?
So it was about non-disclosure agreements. So basically that an employer could not use a non-disclosure agreement to prevent a woman from reporting or in any kind of employment decision. So
Nice.
yeah,
Awesome.
it's been
Wow.
a big issue, I think, these non-disclosure agreements. So we'll see what happens this coming session. I have confidence. We just have to change some wording. Yeah.
Well, as you know, I don't know about most, but many things take more than one session
Right.
to get. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Representative Perruso. I see that
pleasure.
we're out of time, but
Yeah.
this was fabulous. Thanks.
Thank you.